You know how it is, right? You get curious about something and suddenly you're neck deep in books and articles.
Totally, and you're trying to sift through it all and figure out what actually matters.
Exactly. And who has time for all that,
Yeah.
honestly? So on this deep dive, we do the heavy lifting for you.
We take these fascinating topics and boil them down to the essential insights.
So you can absorb the key ideas without having to become a temporary expert.
And today we're tackling a book that I think you'll find particularly intriguing, Smartcuts: How Hackers, Innovators, and Icons Accelerate Success by Shane Snow.
Okay, so the book kicks off with these two really interesting examples that kind of show the two sides of the shortcut coin. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, are all shortcuts created equal? It's a good question to start with.
Right. So first we've got young Benjamin Franklin. His older brother was a printer and wouldn't publish any of Ben's writing.
Classic older brother move.
Right. So Franklin started submitting these essays under the pseudonym Mrs. Silence Dogood.
Wait, Mrs. Silence Dogood, that's amazing.
I know, right? And get this, these essays became super popular. Like everyone in town was reading them and trying to figure out who this brilliant writer was.
So he basically hacked the system to get his work seen.
Exactly. And it worked. He bypassed the whole issue of his age and got his ideas out there on their own merit.
That's a really interesting point. It's like he wasn't trying to deceive for personal gain or anything. He just wanted a fair shot.
Right. It was about overcoming a kind of bias in the system.
I like that.
Okay. But then on the flip side, we have Frank Abagnale Jr., the guy from Catch Me If You Can, you know.
Oh, yeah, the con artist who impersonated all those professionals.
Exactly. He pretended to be a lawyer, a pilot, even a doctor, forging checks, traveling the world, living the high life.
Sounds exciting, but probably not the most ethical path.
Definitely not. And Abagnale himself has said it was all driven by this need to survive. His lies just kept snowballing, and he totally regrets it now.
So it's a shortcut, but with huge negative consequences.
And that's where the book draws a clear distinction. These were shortcuts.
Yeah.
But not smart cuts.
All right, smart cuts are about finding clever alternatives, not exploiting people or acting unethically.
And that brings us to the core idea of a smart cut. It's basically finding a more effective way to reach your goal by challenging conventional thinking.
Like thinking outside the box, finding that unconventional but effective solution.
The author uses this analogy that I think really captures it. He talks about being a kid on the monkey bars and how his arms weren't long enough to just reach from one bar to the next.
Ah, yeah, I remember that feeling.
So he figured out how to swing, use the momentum to get to the next bar. If he stopped swinging, he was stuck.
Right.
It wasn't about being stronger or taller.
It was about understanding the physics of the situation.
Exactly, finding a different leverage point. And that's what smart cuts are all about.
I like that analogy a lot. It really highlights how sometimes it's not about brute force, but about finding a smarter approach.
Okay, so let's apply this smart cut thinking to something we hear all the time, this idea of paying your dues.
Yes, the whole climb the ladder metaphor.
Right, we're told that to succeed, you have to put in the time, grind your way up through the ranks.
Yeah, pay your dues, prove your worth every step of the way.
But the book throws a wrench in that, especially when we look at how people have reached the highest office in the U.S.
You mean the presidency?
Exactly.
Hmm.
We tend to assume it's this long, arduous climb through local politics,
Yeah.
then state, then Congress, maybe VP, and finally the White House.
Yeah, that's the traditional narrative.
But the data paints a different picture.
Yeah.
The book points out that the 10 oldest presidents, who obviously skew the average age upwards, only held federal office for 9 years or less.
9 years or less. That's less than 2 terms in the Senate.
Exactly. And the average for all presidents is even more surprising. Just 7 years as an elected official before becoming president.
So not exactly decades of climbing the political ladder.
And get this, 5 presidents had 0 prior elected experience at all.
Really? So that whole idea of a long political apprenticeship is kind of blown out of the water.
It really makes you question those assumptions, right?
Big time. And the book introduces this really interesting concept here called the Sinatra principle.
The Sinatra principle, what does that have to do with politics?
Well, it's based on that famous Frank Sinatra line. If I can make it there, I'll make it anywhere.
Ah, okay, so it's about transferable skills.
Exactly. It's about people who build credibility and leadership in a completely different field and then leverage that to transition into politics.
So someone who's proven themselves in business or the military, for example.
Right. They've already demonstrated those core leadership qualities, the ability to handle pressure, make tough decisions.
So that success translates into political capital.
Exactly. It's almost like they've skipped a few rungs on the ladder by proving themselves somewhere else.
They got a smart cut to the top.
Makes you wonder if that unconventional path might actually make them better at the job too.
Right.
More adaptable, quick on their feet.
Interesting. So this applies to more than just politics, though, right?
Absolutely. Think about any field where there's this assumed path to success.
Okay, now let's talk about tackling those really big challenges, the ones that seem almost impossible to overcome.
Yeah, those can be daunting.
The book introduces this fun exercise called Bigger or Better. You ever heard of that?
Is that the one where you start with a small item and try to trade it up for something more valuable?
You got it. It's also called the toothpick to television game.
I've heard of that. Sounds fun.
It is. And the results are pretty amazing. The book talks about college students who started with like a toothpick or a paperclip and ended up with things like stereo systems, golf clubs, even a full-size canoe.
All through trading.
Yep, and they did it all in just a few hours.
That's incredible. How does it work?
Well, the key is that people are generally more willing to agree to these small, seemingly low-risk exchanges.
Ah, so it's about overcoming that initial resistance.
Exactly. It's a lot easier to convince someone to trade a toothpick for a pen than to just ask them for a television outright.
That makes sense.
And with each successful trade, you build momentum. The next trade feels a little less risky, a little more achievable.
So it's about building a parlay where each small win becomes the stake for the next.
Precisely. And the book calls this the psychology of small wins, where those little victories actually help you overcome inertia and make progress towards something much bigger.
Okay, so for someone facing a massive project or a really tough challenge, this bigger or better mindset could be a really valuable smart cut.
Definitely. It's all about breaking down that huge goal into a series of smaller, manageable steps.
So instead of getting overwhelmed by the enormity of the task, you focus on those achievable wins.
And each little victory keeps you motivated and moving forward.
I like that a lot.
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about speed. Because the book makes this interesting point that being the fastest isn't always the key to success,
Oh, that's counterintuitive.
right? And they use this analogy of cheetah behavior. We all know cheetahs are the fastest land animals.
Right, but they don't always catch their prey just by outrunning them.
Exactly. The book points out that the real advantage is their agility, their ability to change direction, quickly make those sudden leaps, and decelerate rapidly. It's not just about raw speed.
So it's more about maneuverability and adapting to the situation.
Precisely. And this translates directly to business and other fields.
Okay, I'm curious how so.
Well, the book gives some great examples. Like, think about the iPhone.
Yeah,
It wasn't launched by some giant telecom company.
it was Apple, right?
Yep, a personal computer company that basically pivoted into a totally different market,
Wow, that's a bold move.
and a successful one. Or look at Nintendo. They started with playing cards, then moved into taxis, instant rice, even hotels.
Wait, Nintendo was in the hotel business.
They were for a while, it's true.
Like,
And then they saw this opportunity in the emerging American arcade scene and jumped on it.
so they were constantly adapting and finding new avenues.
Exactly. And then there's James Patterson, the best-selling author who was actually an advertising executive before he started writing novels.
No way.
An idiot. Yeah. And he even applied his marketing expertise to become a bestseller. So it's not like he just stumbled into success.
He leveraged his existing skills in a new way.
And then there's Zoe Saldana, the actress. She was a ballet dancer before she made it in Hollywood.
Wow, so all these people kind of zigzagged their way to success.
That's a great way to put it. And that's what the book calls cheetah behavior.
Yeah.
It's that agility, that ability to change direction quickly and seize those unexpected opportunities.
So it's not just about running in a straight line toward your goal?
It's about being open to those unexpected turns and being willing to adapt.
I like that. It's a much more dynamic approach.
Okay, now let's dive into something that's often talked about, but not always fully understood: mentorship.
Yeah, everyone says you need a mentor, but what does that really mean?
Right. The book acknowledges the data. The fact that learning from successful people can definitely accelerate your progress.
Okay, makes sense.
And they use the example of Justin Bieber, whose rise to fame was obviously helped by Usher Raymond and Scooter Braun.
Yeah, they were his mentors, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then the book throws in this really interesting nuance.
What do you mean?
Well, despite this seemingly perfect mentorship situation, Bieber still went through all those very public struggles.
Oh, right. All those personal challenges he faced.
Exactly. So it raises this question about the quality and the type of mentorship.
So just being mentored isn't enough.
It's not that simple. And the book further illustrates this with another example: the surprisingly high failure rate of family businesses when they're passed down to the next generation.
Oh, wow. You'd think that would be the ideal mentorship scenario, right?
You would think.
Yeah.
But it turns out that just being in close proximity to someone successful isn't enough.
So what's the missing ingredient?
The book calls it journey-focused mentorship.
Okay, and what does that involve?
Well, it's about having mentors who are truly invested in your growth, who give you honest and sometimes tough feedback.
Not just sugarcoating things.
Right. And they push you to think critically about those crucial details you might otherwise overlook.
So it's an active partnership, not just passively receiving information.
Exactly. And for those who might not have access to that ideal mentor, the book offers another perspective. It's about becoming what they call a first-class noticer.
First-class noticer, what's that?
It's about training yourself to observe and analyze the world around you, even from a distance.
Yeah.
Like they use the example of Louis C.K. learning from George Carlin.
Two brilliant comedians.
Right. And Louis C.K. would just study Carlin's performances, dissect his jokes, his timing, his delivery, all without ever actually interacting with him.
So he was basically learning through observation.
Exactly. He turned observation into a form of mentorship.
That's pretty powerful. I like that.
So even if you don't have a personal mentor, you can still learn a ton by paying close attention to the people you admire, figuring out what makes them successful.
Yeah, turning observation into a kind of indirect mentorship.
And this actually ties in really well with our next point, the unexpected benefits of rapid feedback and even embracing failure.
Okay, now that's intriguing.
The book takes us inside the world of comedy training at the Second City in Chicago.
Oh yeah, the famous improv school.
And what's so effective about their approach is that they throw people on stage in front of a live audience right away.
Trial by fire.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And they emphasize that the audience's reaction, the laughter or the lack thereof, is valuable data, not a personal attack.
So it's a safe space to experiment and fail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then they gradually increase the pressure, encourage performers to push their boundaries.
So it's about getting comfortable with failure as part of the learning process.
Precisely. And this contrasts sharply with what the book calls the paradox of failure, which they observed in fields like heart surgery and startups.
Paradox of failure. What's paradoxical about it?
Well, research showed that surgeons who had a negative outcome with a new procedure actually tended to perform worse in subsequent surgeries.
So failure actually led to worse performance.
And similarly, startups that failed weren't necessarily more successful with their next venture.
That's surprising. You'd think they'd learn from their mistakes.
You would. But the book explains that it comes down to how we interpret those failures.
What do you mean?
Well, we often blame external factors, bad luck, tough market, whatever. It protects our ego.
So we don't really own up to our mistakes.
And without that honest self-reflection, we don't actually learn from them.
Whereas at the Second City, they actively encourage that reflection.
Exactly. They analyze the audience's response,
Yeah.
objectively focus on the material itself, not their personal feelings.
So it's all about data and iteration.
Precisely. And we see a similar approach with Upworthy and their headline testing.
Oh, yeah, they're known for that.
They'll A/B test dozens of headlines for the same article, track click-through rates and shares to see what really resonates with people.
It's like a scientific approach to content creation.
And it's super effective. So for anyone involved in marketing or content, this idea of rapid feedback is a powerful smart cut.
It's about using data to constantly refine your approach.
Okay, now let's talk about platforms and how leveraging them strategically can lead to exponential growth.
Okay, platforms like social media or something else.
Well, the book actually starts with a computer programming concept called abstraction.
Abstraction? That sounds complicated.
It's really not. It's basically about building layers of code to simplify complex tasks.
Okay, I think I'm following.
Like the classic hello world example in programming. You type in this simple command, and the computer, through all these layers of translation, displays those words on the screen.
Right.
But you don't need to understand all the intricate details of how the computer actually does that.
You're just working with that top layer.
Exactly. And this idea of building on layers to simplify things goes beyond just programming. The book talks about these iPad apps like Daisy the Dinosaur and Hopscotch.
I've heard of those. They're for kids, right?
Yeah, they teach kids basic programming concepts through these intuitive puzzles and visual interfaces.
So it's like a simplified introduction to coding.
Exactly. They abstract away all the complicated syntax and focus on the underlying logic.
So it's about making learning more accessible.
Precisely. But the book also makes this important point, that while these platforms are incredibly useful, a foundational understanding is still crucial.
Okay, so you need to know the basics before you can really leverage the tools.
Right. Like you need to understand math before you can rely on a calculator.
Makes sense.
And the book uses the example of Finland's education system as a kind of high-level platform.
Finland, they're known for having a great education system.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's because they prioritize teaching those fundamental tools, problem-solving skills, critical thinking.
Instead of just rote memorization.
Right. They've invested in highly qualified teachers who can really guide students.
So they're building a strong foundation from the ground up.
Exactly. And then they use effective tools to amplify that learning.
I like that.
Okay, now, the book uses this guy, David Heinemeier Hansson, also known as DHH, as an example of how to leverage platforms.
Okay, what does he do?
Well, he's a programmer. He created Ruby on Rails, which is a popular web development framework, but he's also a race car driver.
Wow, interesting combo.
Right. And in racing, he used these slick tires, which are risky in the wet, but give you a huge advantage on a dry track.
So it's about choosing the right tool for the situation.
Exactly. And with Ruby on Rails, he created this platform that allowed other programmers to build web applications much faster and more efficiently.
So he's leveraging technology to give people a boost.
And that's the essence of a platform. It gives you leverage. It allows you to accomplish more with less effort.
So it's about working smarter, not harder.
Exactly. And that's a powerful smart cut in any field.
Okay, so we've talked about platforms now. Let's talk about trends, recognizing those emerging waves and writing them to success.
The book contrasts this with just paddling harder.
Like you can put in all this effort, but if you're swimming against the current, you're not going to get very far.
Exactly. It's about identifying those currents, those emerging trends, and timing your entry perfectly.
Like catching a wave at just the right moment.
Precisely. And the book argues that this skill of recognizing patterns can actually compensate for a lack of experience.
Really? How so?
They give the example of professional surfers who will come to a new beach, and by analyzing the wave conditions, they can often outperform local surfers who've been surfing there for years.
So it's about understanding the underlying dynamics.
Exactly. It's not just about intuition or experience.
Makes sense.
And this brings us to what the book calls the 20% doctrine.
Okay, what's that?
It's the idea of constantly experimenting with potential trends, allocating a small amount of your resources to various emerging areas.
So you're kind of hedging your bets.
Exactly. You're not putting all your eggs in one basket. You're spreading them out a bit and seeing what takes off.
So you're ready to capitalize on that wave when it forms.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And the book also challenges this common idea of the first mover advantage.
Yeah, being the first to market is always the best strategy, right?
Well, not necessarily.
Yeah.
The book explains that fast followers can often learn from the mistakes of those pioneers and ultimately achieve greater success.
So you can actually benefit from being second or third.
Exactly. Think about companies like Google, Facebook, Microsoft. They weren't the first search engine, the first social network, the first operating system.
Right, but they learned from what others had done and ultimately became dominant.
And then there's Sonny Moore, also known as Skrillex, the DJ and music producer.
Oh, yeah, he's huge.
And he's a great example of someone who's ridden multiple waves in the music industry, from screamo to dubstep.
So he's constantly adapting to the changing landscape.
Exactly. He's paying attention to those shifts and making sure he's positioned to capitalize on them.
That's smart.
Okay, now let's talk about the power of connections. Specifically, something the book calls super connectors.
Okay, super connectors. Who are they?
They're people with these really broad networks, and they actively connect other people.
Like the ultimate networkers.
Exactly. And the book uses the example of the Cuban Revolution and Radio Rebelde.
Okay, I'm not familiar with that story.
So basically, Che Guevara brought a radio transmitter to the rebel camp, and this allowed them to connect with all these oppressed Cuban citizens, broadcast their message, and rally support for the revolution.
So the radio became this powerful tool for communication.
And Che Guevara acted as this super connector, using the platform to amplify the message and mobilize a huge network of people.
That's pretty amazing.
Right. And then the book brings in this research by Adam Grant on givers.
Givers, people who are always helping others.
Exactly. And his research suggests that givers, even those who help people who are better connected than themselves, often achieve greater long-term success.
Really, that's counterintuitive. You'd think they'd be taken advantage of.
You would.
Yeah.
But it turns out that building those relationships, creating value for others, actually pays off in the long run.
Okay, I'm starting to see the pattern here.
And the book gives some great examples, like J.J. Abrams, the filmmaker. He's known for being super collaborative and generous, and that helps him attract top talent.
Yeah, people want to work with him.
Exactly. And Sonny Moore, again, he's always collaborating with other artists in the EDM scene, boosting their profiles while also expanding his own network.
So it's mutually beneficial.
And then there's Mintcom, the personal finance website. They focused on creating valuable content about money management, which attracted all these influential users on sites like Dig and Reddit.
So they were providing value first.
Exactly. And then those super connectors shared Mint's content with their networks, driving tons of traffic and new users.
That's a really smart strategy.
And then there's the viral spread of things like the double rainbow video and Michelle Phan's makeup tutorials.
Yeah, those blew up online.
And it was largely thanks to super connectors, influential people sharing that content with their massive audiences.
So it's all about those connections.
Exactly. And building relationships, adopting that giving mindset can be a huge smart cut to achieving your goals.
It's about recognizing that helping others can ultimately help you too.
Okay, now let's talk about maintaining momentum and avoiding what the book calls the comfort trap.
The comfort track sounds cozy.
It might sound that way, but the book points out this interesting phenomenon. You know how some people achieve massive success, like billionaires or astronauts,
Yeah, they've reached the pinnacle.
and then they get depressed?
Really? Why?
Well, the book suggests that once that initial euphoria fades, there's this need to find new challenges, set new goals. It's like they have to start the Olympic rings over,
So staying at the top can actually be harder than getting there?
in a way. And they use this contrast between Bear Vasquez, the double rainbow guy, and Michelle Phan.
Oh yeah, what happened to him?
Well, he had this viral moment, but he wasn't able to sustain it. Michelle Phan, on the other hand, built this massive library of content and kept engaging her audience.
So she was constantly building and evolving.
Exactly. And then there's that famous Oreo tweet during the Super Bowl, Dunk in the Dark.
Oh yeah, that was brilliant.
Right. They were able to capitalize on that unexpected power outage because they had built this strong social media presence and they had these efficient processes in place.
So they were prepared for the moment.
Exactly. They had that potential energy stored up, ready to be released.
That's a great analogy.
And the point is that sustained success requires continuous effort.
Yeah.
You can't just reach the peak and coast
You have to keep pushing yourself, keep adapting.
and actively avoid that comfort trap.
Wise words.
Finally, let's talk about the power of simplicity and something the book calls 10x thinking.
10x thinking. That sounds ambitious.
It is. The book defines disruptive innovation as this lower-cost product that steals market share.
Okay, like how email basically replaced traditional mail.
Exactly, or how Craigslist disrupted classified ads. And they use the example of Jane Chen and her Embrace infant warmer.
What's that?
It's this simple, affordable device that helps premature babies stay warm in developing countries.
So it's a low-tech solution to a critical problem.
Precisely. And then there's Elon Musk and his goal for SpaceX, making life multiplanetary.
That's a pretty huge goal.
It is. And to achieve it, he focused on drastically reducing the cost of space travel, not through incremental improvements, but by aiming for a tenfold decrease.
10 times cheaper. That's radical.
And that's what 10x thinking is all about. It's about setting goals that are an order of magnitude greater than what seems reasonable.
So it's about thinking big, really big.
And the book argues that this kind of audacious thinking can actually lead to greater innovation and attract more support.
How so?
Well, think about JFK's moonshot. It was this seemingly impossible goal, but it galvanized resources and spurred all these incredible technological advances.
So aiming for the moon actually helped us get there.
Exactly. And there's this psychological phenomenon called the N effect, where more competitors actually decrease motivation for incremental gains.
So the more people who are trying to achieve something small, the less motivated they are.
Exactly. But when you set these massive 10x goals, there's less competition because fewer people are thinking at that level.
So it's actually easier to stand out.
In a way. And it forces you to come up with truly innovative solutions.
So 10x thinking is about breaking free from those limitations and imagining what's truly possible.
Okay, to bring all this together, the book ends with a story of Dwayne Edwards.
Who's he?
He's a shoe designer. He overcame a lot of obstacles, age, lack of formal education, racial bias to become successful, and he founded Pencil, which is this amazing non-traditional design academy.
Wow, that's inspiring.
It is. And his journey really embodies a lot of the Smartcuts we've talked about.
Like how?
Well, he found unconventional ways into the design industry. He used creative problem solving to overcome barriers. He embraced rapid feedback to hone his skills.
So he was constantly learning and adapting.
And he built a platform with Pencil to empower others. He recognized and rode the cultural wave of sneaker design. He became a key connector in the industry.
He was hitting all the points.
Exactly. And whether he was consciously applying these principles or not, it clearly worked.
So it's a real-world example of how these smart cuts can lead to remarkable success.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the key takeaway is that Smartcuts aren't about cheating or taking the easy way out.
They're about working smarter, identifying those more effective paths to achievement, and tailoring your approach to your unique strengths and opportunities.
And on that note, we leave you with this final question. Which of these SmartCut principles resonates most with you? Which one might offer a new perspective on your own goals and challenges?
Maybe this deep dive has sparked some ideas or inspired you to explore these concepts further.
We encourage you to keep learning, keep questioning, and maybe even discover your own unique SmartCuts to success.
The possibilities are endless.